Hello, everyone. I see people starting to trickle in. We're just going to give it a couple minutes before we get fully started. In the interim, please feel free to put your name and where you're from in the chat box so we can all start to get to know each other. Hey, Bill from Chicago. All right, everyone. I see a lot of people starting trickling in. So we're just getting everybody in here to get started. So we'll give it a couple more minutes. Please let us know where you're from. Hey, Sean from Fort Collins. Stephanie from Texas. Maureen from Canada, Southern Alberta. How are you? Karen from Milwaukee. Lynn from Texas. Hey, Evan from Seattle. Hey, Tracy from Michigan. Hello there from Atlanta. Indiana, Colorado, British Columbia. Well, we're represented here. All right, lots of people from Texas. Okay, so we'll give it about another minute or two. Let some more people trickle in, and then we'll get going. Oops. Hey, Lisa from Illinois, Paul from Texas. Evan said he's so excited to hear from Jen, so that's great. She's going to be a great guest. So just a couple more minutes, everyone. We'll welcome everyone. We'll just give it a couple more minutes so people could get logged on. Hey, Lisa from Illinois. Okay, just one more minute. All right, let's get the live cast going. So hi, everyone. I'd like to get started now. So my name's Adrian, and I'm the marketing manager at IHHP. I want to thank you all for choosing to spend your time with us today and welcome you to our live cast. Today's live cast is on the essential skill every leader needs to be a great coach. Now, before we get started, I wanted to tell you a little bit about who we are at IHHP. So IHHP is a research-based training company and has been at the forefront of teaching the essential skills of emotional intelligence for 25 years. We provide cutting-edge training to help your people manage emotion and do what's difficult so they can achieve great things together. Now, as we get started, I'll ask you, please put any questions you have throughout the live cast into the Q&A, and we'll take them along the way. And to help us get started today, I'm going to introduce our partner and top executive coach and emotional intelligence keynote speaker, Mr. Bill Benjamin. Bill has over 30 years of business experience, but like many of us, he struggled with EQ early in his career. Although he's long since overcome those fears and now works with leaders on how to leverage EQ-based coaching to drive performance, engagement, and retention. Bill has worked with many diverse groups, including the US Marines, NASA, Intel, and even surgeons. Bill, I'll pass it over to you.
Thanks, Adrian. And by the way, I don't think my teenage daughters think that I've overcome my challenges with emotional intelligence. So they're the best judges of that. All right. Hey, welcome, everyone. So excited to have you here. I am thrilled to introduce Jennifer York from Maxar Technologies. We have been working together. I don't even want to say how many years it is now, Jen, and just love having her here. So she's learning and leadership development at Maxar. She works on leadership culture. Right now, they're working on a project to embed coaching culture at Maxar. Like me, she's been doing this for 30 years. And in addition to working for a large organization like Maxar, she's also consulted to multiple different organizations. So she's familiar with a lot of different industries. So Jen, welcome. Great to have you here.
Thank you so much. Glad to be here, Bill. It's always fun to spend time with you.
It is. All right, so what are the goals for today? What do we hope you'll get out of today? Number one, an understanding of the importance of connecting to emotions when coaching and really digging into what we call emotional needs. Secondly, learn skills, a strategy to be more effective as a coach. So both insights and strategy. And then finally, really, how can you lead building a coaching culture in your organization? So the agenda is we're going to share a little bit of research that our organization has done, because the Institute for Health and Human Potential is both a research and learning organization. We'll talk about the importance of emotions in coaching. We're going to start with a little bit about managing yourself, because we have to start with ourselves first. And then, as I said, I'm going to teach a strategy to connect the emotions of others. And finally, we'll have a discussion about creating a coaching culture. So let's dig in. So what's some of our coaching research? Well, we studied 18,000 people. And we found that 80% of those people, 80% said they would stay in their job longer as a result of being coached and developed. Given how critical retention is right now, and I haven't talked to a client in the last 2 months who haven't said retention is our number one issue, and engagement, wow, this is important. People are begging to be coached and developed. And one thing we'll make clear is coaching isn't just about having the nice, good conversations about their strengths and where they're doing well. That's important. It's also about giving them difficult feedback, which for some is really challenging to do right now, because they worry, oh, what if I don't do that conversation well? Will I have a negative impact on that person, maybe even lose them? 71% of these people would like their manager to spend more time coaching them. So just another statistic showing that people want coaching. Here's what I found really interesting is 68% of the people who are coaches, they struggle to get beyond behaviors to what actually motivates and drives people. So that's why this learning is so valuable. So Jen, as you see these statistics, what comes to mind for you?
Well, I think about the work that we're doing at Maxar as we take in today's expectation of employees and what the business needs, and that concern about retaining employees. And I think about our language of leadership, our leadership framework here that we instituted and sort of brought to life just 2 years ago. And we're taking a quick peek at that, and we're refreshing the behaviors. What is it that we need to be focusing on now? What do our leaders need to be focusing? And we've made the recognition that we need to add coaching as an expectation of our leaders, that the skill and the expectation is needed in our leaders. There's just no way around it. So we're really looking at adding that as part of our leaders, the behaviors that we need to be successful in the organization.
And Jenna, I know in addition to getting that commitment from your senior leadership team, you're also getting investment from the senior leadership team. What are they seeing as the return on investment? Why are they investing these dollars?
So I think they're looking at investing these dollars from a couple of different perspectives. Retention, 100%, right? We've got some very specialized skill sets within our organization, and incredible demand and need to hold on to these folks. So we want to up the level of skills within our leader population so that we can continue to hold on. We have the best possible leaders. That's an attractor for us when we're out in the talent marketplace. Yeah. As our employees who have those specialized skills are talking to colleagues and friends at conferences and things like that, they're talking about the quality of the leaders within the organization. And it's really a retention and attraction tool for us, in addition to just helping us to make sure we can get the most out of these amazing employees without killing them, right? Without burning them up, because the demand is very, very high right now. And we know from all of the stories that are out there on the Great Resignation, how burnout is a huge concern. And so can we adjust the way we're interacting with our employees to try to address some of that?
Yeah, great. And by the way, I realized we didn't explain to people who Maxar Technologies is. A lot of us have come to know you over the last couple of months, but maybe just give a quick explanation of what Maxar does.
Maxar is a space technology and Earth intelligence organization, and we build and fly satellites around the world for both commercial and public usage. And you may see us as we partner with many news organizations to provide data and information. So a lot of times now when you're watching a news show and they're giving you a live update of information from a particular hotspot in the world,
we all know that.
Likely those satellite images will have our logo or our name somewhere on those images.
Yeah. And So you've got a group of really highly analytical, highly engineering, highly technically skilled people in general, and not just at Maxar, but in your experience working with organizations. Are those folks getting promoted because of their great coaching skills, or are they getting promoted for another reason?
I think it's another reason, Bill.
What might that reason be?
It is far more about output and expertise and results than it is necessarily about coaching. And it is a challenge working with a highly analytical engineering sort of mindset to get them to start being willing to think about changing their approach, right? And to look at the skill of coaching and connecting with people at an emotional level and talking with people about what's supporting their performance or what's getting in the way from their performance. That's not always a comfortable conversation. And so helping our folks that have more analytical, structural sort of perspectives and approaches, they want what's the steps, what's the 1, 2, 3 to get ABC, and it's not always that clear cut. So trying to give them some skills and some techniques to be successful and to feel comfortable and to then be willing to put these practices into place to help support their people and to get the best from their people.
Yeah, I've heard a funny quote, get a lot of sun and water because we're basically houseplants with complex emotions. Right?
Yes.
And folks don't really know my background, or some that are on the line. I have degrees in mathematics and computer science, and I spent 14 years in the computer software industry. And I got promoted because I was driving performance and because I was pretty, technically skilled. And so I struggled. I mean, by the way, my experience of a coach was my high school basketball and track and field coaches and what I saw from college football coaches on TV. And of course, what do they all do? They just run around yelling at you, telling everyone what to do. So
Right.
that was my view of what coaching was. And by the way, when I got introduced to this idea of emotional intelligence-based coaching, I was like, are you kidding? That's all soft and squishy. Well, clearly I'm here because I've come around to recognize the importance and the value of it. So that's great. We can talk all day just on that topic. So hopefully most of the folks on the line here do understand the positive impact that coaching will have on all the things we just discussed: retention, performance, engagement, people feeling valued so they're feeling less burnt out. So there's a real business case for coaching. So what do we mean when we say EQ-based coaching? Why EQ-based coaching? Well, here's why, and you're going to learn this in the next few minutes. Emotional needs are what drive behavior and attitude. So as a coach, we're trying to change behavior and adjust attitude where needed, or create a positive attitude. But if we're only focusing on behaviors, it's sort of like the iceberg analogy, right? The behavior and the attitudes, what's above the surface, and below the surface are all these emotional needs. And great coaches connect to emotional needs. Now, what do I mean by emotional needs? Again, that can sound a bit soft and squishy. Well, we have what we call our emotional wheel, and it looks like this. There are 6 major emotional needs that we all have. So all of us have these emotional needs. We have different ones to different degrees. So there's safety, there's feeling included, there's feeling competent, autonomous, valued, respected. We all have these. And I'm going to go into a little more detail on each of these. So safety can be something obvious like physical safety. I mean, on a manufacturing floor, that's critical. Security, job security. So whenever somebody hears about a change, their first thought is, oh my gosh, is my job going to be secure? I'm going to have a different boss who's not as good as mine, right? The predictability and certainty. Again, our emotional system, it's there to protect us. And so it wants certainty. And so when that certainty is challenged, that need impacts our behavior and our attitude. So gosh, these last couple of years, wow, has there been a lot of uncertainty. And there's more uncertainty coming up. Inclusion. I mean, think of DE&I, the degree to which this is just so important. It's more than just the feeling included. There's the feeling accepted, wanting to be liked. We all have a need to be liked. That was a big one for me when I got promoted from amongst my peers who were my friends. And then suddenly as a manager, I'm supposed to have conversations where I'm giving them difficult feedback, but they're my friends. That was hard. And that happens to a lot of folks who get promoted. We all want to feel needed and paid attention to. And Jen, feel free to jump in here as I go through these, if any of them kind of trigger a thought for you. Competence is a big one, right? We all want to feel successful. We want to have a positive reputation. So if somebody's not responding to my emails, the emotional need might be I'm not feeling included, I'm not feeling paid attention to, but it might be, well, I'm trying to get something done, I'm trying to achieve something, and they're getting in my way because they're not getting back to me. So again, emotional needs, or these needs not being met, will trigger our behaviors and attitude.
Competence is when I certainly see as people move into leadership roles from sort of technical expert, subject matter expert type roles, right?
Yeah.
Because they've gotten reward and recognition for being really, really good technically. And now they're stepping into a leadership role and they may not feel competent as a leader. It's that
Right.
part of their job that they don't feel as good about. And so you see some of those less effective behaviors coming because we're asking them to play in a space that they don't have any experience in, or they don't feel good at it.
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, I was coaching a woman just last week, and she told the story of her boss who had offered her a promotion and she'd said yes. She went away and thought about it and phoned him and left him a message and said, no, you shouldn't promote me. I'm not ready. I'm not competent. Fortunately, he's a good boss. And he went back to her and said, no, you are. I believe in you. Trust in yourself. And sure enough, she excelled in the job. But think about the behavior that drove for her to actually decline a promotion.
Right.
She didn't feel she had the skills and the competence. And there is a difference there between men and women. Men will generally accept or think they're qualified for a promotion or a new project if they have kind of 75% of the skills, where women sort of feel like, I need to have 100%. I need to know everything in order to do this job. And Jen, you're smiling.
Oh yeah, it's that, am I even going to apply for the role or for the opportunity if I don't 100% match every little criteria in a job description? And I know, Bill, you've written job descriptions, I've written job descriptions, and we're looking for all the things we could possibly need, right? And we don't really expect one person to have all those things, but
Right.
It is that gender difference. Absolutely.
Yeah, there is. But again, just seeing how these emotional needs drive behaviors. Wow, autonomy. We all know to the degree to which we're all wired to want to feel in control. Again, we feel safer. We all want to have our voices heard. What do people do when their voice isn't being heard? Well, they either shut down so their voice is even less heard, or they raise their voices, which is my strategy at home.
Get louder.
How do you think that works at getting me heard at home when I raise my voice? It doesn't work. So again, these emotional needs drive behaviors that often are unskillful. When they're not met, our emotional system gets triggered, and we move to behaviors. Context and reasoning. Why am I doing this? That's why, again, in each person, I'm very much a context person. Our founder, my business partner, Dr. JP Palouf-Fry, that's not critical to him. He'll send me emails with no description, and I'll get something and be like, why is he sending me this? Right? So we all have different needs.
Bill, do you think the autonomy need has gone up as a result of the pandemic and so many people, working from home and not necessarily being in a day-to-day sort of supervisory overseeing type interactions with the other people that they work with? Do you think the need for autonomy, people are realizing it more?
Yeah, and keep in mind, as a manager, one of the behaviors that a sense of autonomy and control, when I feel I'm not in control, drives is micromanaging. I'm a serial micromanager. So, I've really learned to manage myself and try to, trust people, let them do it their way, not try to, nitpick every little thing. But yeah, when I'm feeling a little out of control, I become more of a micromanager. So that's a great question. And certainly in the pandemic, back to the safety, that's become a much bigger trigger for people. Okay, we all know the degree to which people want to feel valued. It's funny, I was, many of you will know Ken Blanchard, who's, a famous kind of guru in the whole leadership area. He wrote the book 1 Minute Manager. Situational leadership is their work. And when he was kind of 80 something years old, I attended a webinar, a live cast like this that he did, and they had updated 1 Minute Manager because, it wasn't as relevant. But he said, when we got to the give praise chapter, he said, yeah, we didn't change that. Because he said, in my 60 years of doing this, I've never heard someone say, I get too much praise at work.
Right.
Right. So this one is really critical, that people feel valued and appreciated. And finally, gosh, we all have a need to feel respected. And part of being respected is to feel understood, being treated fairly. I mean, any of you who have kids, you know that is one of the first emotional needs they will express. It's not fair. That's not fair. It's such a natural need that we all have. So again, when you think about diversity and inclusion, that sense of fairness can be a big trigger for people. Jen, any of your thoughts on this wheel?
You know, the last thought that popped up to me is that idea around being valued. And again, with some of the changes in work location, do I feel valued? Like, do I even feel seen when, you know, I'm only interacting with people digitally, right? Like, do you see the work that I'm doing? Do you see the effort that I'm putting in order to create the outcomes? And so that question of communicating the value and speaking to how well you value an individual's contribution as a leader, maybe even heightened as we are more distant from our colleagues.
Yeah, and that sense of, gosh, I'm doing all this work and nobody's recognizing it, that contributes to burnout and stress. Because if I feel like that extra work is being valued and acknowledged, I feel better about it. So again, that's that emotional need to feel valued can absolutely have a big impact on burnout. I want to give a quick coaching example of how connecting to emotional needs helped me coach someone. So I said I worked at a computer software company, and I was managing this highly technical, highly skilled person. And he was one of those technical folks that if you asked him what time it was, he would explain how to build a watch. So he was giving very long technical explanations of things. He was sending long emails, and I'd been coaching him to talk less in meetings, to shorten his emails, the behavior, and he wasn't changing. I was getting frustrated. This was right when I was learning this emotional intelligence coaching approach. And so when I really dug into it, got to his side of the bridge, I came to understand that for him, those long explanations, those long emails, he respected that. He thought that demonstrated credibility and competence. So his emotional need was to be respected, was to have a good reputation. When I explained to him that other people are different, talk about drivers on your Myers-Briggs or DISC, that they want short pieces of information, and that in fact, by giving the long explanations and the long emails, it was having a negative effect on his credibility and his reputation and the respect he was earning. It was like a light switch went off for him. He's like, sending me emails. Is this short enough? He's asking me how he did in meetings. Like suddenly he got it, and he absolutely changed his behavior. So that for me, that was a great example of the first time that I was really able to connect with someone's emotions to help them change their behavior.
Yeah, I think that's such a key example in the way that the light bulb went off for him, right? He was actually preventing what he wanted with the way he was showing up. I've talked to so many leaders and tried to help them start to take a coach approach with their employees as they're having conversation and as they're working with their team. And sometimes they come back to me and they say, I coached them, but they're not being any different. I gave them a coaching. Yeah. I love that. A coaching and they're not being different. What's going on? And they're not seeing both sides of it, right? They're just dissecting what's working, what's not working, and giving feedback really. And they're not getting to that place of what's preventing this person. It is the emotional side of things that they're staying away from. Maybe they feel less comfortable there. When they stay away from it, they're not getting the results that they want. And then it makes them question, does this coaching thing work? Right. So not connecting to these drivers actually can impact the success of the interaction.
Absolutely. Or not even, does this coaching work? Am I a bad coach? Mm-hmm. I'm no good at this. I'm not competent. Now my emotional need to be competent comes up. Right. And now I stop coaching because I'm just not any good at this.
I'm just not a people person.
Yeah. Exactly. We had a question come in. It says, when you say coaching, do you mean leading and supervising as well? Absolutely. I mean, this work applies in any role you're in. I mean, we're kind of focusing on that leader manager or that manager individual contributor role where you're, responsible for the coaching and development, but everything we're talking about applies to working with peers, applies to how you approach your boss. It applies to your kids and your spouses and partners because they all have emotional needs. So everything we're learning today is really applicable in any walk of life. So thank you for that question. There's another one. Is there a reason why the emotional needs are shown by different colors in the wheel? No, that's just to differentiate them. So thank you for that clarifying question. Okay. All right. So we all have these emotional needs. And in order to coach and develop, we've got to connect to those emotional needs. So what does that look like? What exactly is an EQ-based coaching approach? It is this idea of being aware of and thinking through and asking questions that will lead to emotional needs being expressed. Because people don't walk around saying, oh, well, I felt disrespected, so therefore I'm not feeling valued. And a lot of times, by the way, they don't even know. They're not aware of these emotional needs. So you're having to not only think about it on yourself, you're having to help them uncover it. So how do we do that? Well, number one, you start with yourself. You can't give what you don't have. If you're not aware of your own emotional needs, it's very difficult to spot them and identify them in others. So a big part of what we teach in our training programs is that whole area of self-awareness. And Jen, I know you're familiar with that. What a key self-awareness is, I mean, to anything you do, but especially to coaching.
Yeah, well, I think if you consider yourself an informal or a formal leader, self-awareness is what I call the cost of doing business, right? It is the key and the entry point. Thinking about what you're good at, where you struggle, working to get better at it, to recognize where you need to shore up some of those areas where you're not as comfortable, and how do you manage for those places where you struggle. That's key. So it is really challenging to step into a coaching relationship if you haven't stopped to think about where you're starting from.
Absolutely. And by the way, are emotions impacting you in this coaching relationship? So that, that person who was making too long technical explanations, I'm starting to get frustrated. Now my bias and judgments and criticisms are coming up. Now how I'm interacting with him is changing. And so we really have to be aware of what our emotional response is, what our emotional needs are, before we can coach someone else effectively. So I'm going to talk a little bit later toward the end about our virtual emotional intelligence training. That's what it really, the shorter fundamentals program really goes into is, how am I managing myself? Another thing we need to do, if we are expecting other people to take our feedback, we have to model it. Einstein said leading by example is not the main means of influencing people, it's the only means. And receiving feedback is what we call a last 8% situation. Last 8%, we're all pretty good at the 92%, right? Where everyone's agreeing and we're getting good feedback and everyone's getting along. But then there's those difficult things, a tough decision that not everyone agrees with, or somebody giving us critical feedback or having to give them critical feedback. When we hit that last part, right, we get 92% of the way there, the other person starts to react. We start to react because emotions are infectious. Now, most of us avoid, 68% of people in our research will avoid either giving or receiving feedback. So they'll just shut down. Now, the other 32%, and I tend to fall in this category, we make a mess of it. The other person starts getting emotional, we start getting defensive, or somebody's making a suggestion that feels like a criticism, and now I'm getting defensive, and we're making a mess of it. So we actually have to model giving feedback. Jen, I saw you smile there as I was talking about that.
So, I work with a lot of leaders and we talk a lot about how to give feedback and would you be willing to give feedback and what gets in the way. And sometimes people are really nervous about giving feedback that might feel embarrassing to the person who's receiving it, right? I try to just get to sort of that human level, sort of at our base moment, right? If we were having a conversation and I had broccoli in my teeth, I would be more embarrassed that you didn't tell me I had broccoli in my teeth, right? So what's the feedback that if you tell me, I can correct it and I can prevent being embarrassed in front of anybody else, right? So you actually do me a favor by being clear and kind and direct with, Jen, hey, just take a second and get that little thing out of your teeth and then you can go forward and keep going.
I love that example because what it made me think of is the degree to which the relationship, the connection and trust and respect in the relationship. Because if it's someone new and you don't really know them, you don't even like them, you're going to let them have the broccoli in their teeth, right? But if it's someone you feel trust, you feel connection, they'll accept your feedback. You'll just tell them about the broccoli. Well, same with giving, coaching feedback, performance feedback. And again, there's two different types of there's developmental, which is, hey, I'm working on getting better at this area or this thing, and that tends to be a little more positive. Then there's performance feedback, right? Something someone's got to work on. So there really are those two parts. Most of us are probably pretty okay at the developmental part because that's a little easier. It's that tough part where they have the broccoli in their teeth. That's
Right.
All right, so we're starting with ourself. And again, we could do a whole webinar on just how do you manage your own emotions? How do you recognize your own emotional needs, strategies to manage, but that's not our focus today. Our focus today now is, all right, how do you take this and apply it to others? How exactly do you connect to emotional needs? Well, number one, as we said, recognize it in ourselves, but also recognize that other people have different emotional needs. So again, as we go into the coaching, we don't want to go in with any kind of certainty. Oh, I feel this way. I don't feel included when that happens. So that must be the way they're feeling. We want to go in with curiosity because everyone's different, right? We're all, you don't know that we're all wired very differently. So we want to recognize it in ourselves, but then recognize that it's different in others. All right, then we want to build a bridge using what we call VVF. And so this is your strategy that we're going to talk about. If you want to now, you're thinking, yeah, this is a pretty good idea. I should connect to emotions that drive people's behaviors. How do you do that? So we have a model at IHHP for coaching, and you imagine a bridge and there's two sides, and there's always an understanding gap. One of our facilitators likes to say, I wonder if two people are ever really in the same conversation, because we all come to it with our biases and our experiences and our assumptions and our perspectives. Most of us, when we step in to lead, coach, engage, drive change, we do it from our side of the bridge because we're knowledgeable. We were promoted because we're smart and we have a lot of technical skills, right? A coach is supposed to run around telling everybody what to do. We have authority, so we can get our way. The challenge is there's often someone over on the other side of the bridge kind of looking down going, the last time, Bill asked me to help with something, he didn't really, acknowledge me. And then when I emailed him, he didn't get back to me. And you know what, I'm not moving. Or from a coaching perspective, we're simply coaching to the behaviors that we observe. That's coaching from our side of the bridge. And again, sitting over here is a technical guy going, yeah, he's asking me to write shorter emails, but I'm not going to look competent if I write shorter emails. I'm not going to earn respect. So he's just resisting. He's not, and by the way, he's not saying that to himself. That's something unconscious. He doesn't even realize it sometimes. Okay, so what's the coaching model? We have to get off our side of the bridge. We have to get unstuck from the side of the bridge and move over to their side of the bridge. Now, that can be difficult because we're busy and we don't have a lot of time, but this is critical to this type of coaching. So we walk over to their side of the bridge metaphorically, and we think through what is going on for them. How might this be impacting them? What challenges do they face? What do I know about their strengths and weaknesses? What might be causing, what emotional need might be they having? Now, we might make some assumptions about what emotional need they might have, but we need to find out. So how do we do that? Well, first of all, the V, V, and F, the V and V are voice and value. So voice is where we let them talk first. Again, coaching and developing and giving feedback isn't just about doing it from our side of the bridge and saying, well, you need to work on this. And when that happened, you should do this better. You want to let them talk, because a lot of times they might be aware that they weren't at their best, or they made up, they messed up, or they didn't speak up where they should have. So they'll self-diagnose. Well, you know what? You're right. I probably should have done better at this. So sometimes you don't even have to have that last 8% conversation because they bring it up. And you all know if they bring it up, then they're much more likely to accept it. So we want to start by giving people voice. We also want to make sure they feel valued. Now, there's value in terms of that emotional need that we talked about. In a coaching conversation, value is also about acknowledging them. The challenge a lot of people have with acknowledging is they think it means agreeing. They think it means not being right. They think it means even giving in. So they're coming over to this side of the bridge. Oh, I've got to give in. And, well, they aren't performing, but they're telling me all these things. They're challenging. So I guess I've just got to, accept that. That's not what valuing or voice is. It's simply acknowledging that person has those emotional needs that you've identified through probing questions. So Jen, let me stop there. And any thoughts on what we've just discussed? Because I know you're familiar with our bridge model.
When I think about voice, I think that and emotion, right? And so many leaders, as we've tried to help people become more aware of emotions and have a better language and vocabulary around emotion, they often start off by telling other people how they feel. And so voice is that opportunity to, as you said, lead with curiosity, lead with inquiry, and let someone else tell you what they're experiencing, because I can only say what I see, but I can't necessarily tell you how you feel. And people are so resistant when, when the people are like, oh, you're mad. I'm not mad. I'm not mad. I'm frustrated. Oh,
Right.
okay. There's a difference.
Yes.
But there is. And when you lead with voice and let them talk about what's going on, you get the resistance starts to break down to having the conversation, because they're not being labeled. They're not taking on your description of their experience.
Yeah. And I love what you just brought up, because you're right. Sometimes people will express emotions like, that made me mad. I'm frustrated. I was angry. Anger is a secondary emotion. It's triggered by a primary emotional need. So anger is triggered by lack of fairness, or not feeling liked, or not feeling respected. So one clue when you're coaching to draw out emotional needs is when someone uses an emotion like that. Another clue is they'll use words. They'll say things like, oh, that was a punch in the gut. Okay, that means they felt something emotionally. That means the emotional need was triggered. So as you're coaching and you're doing this voice and value, and again, where the value in a coaching sense is acknowledging, is really listening for those clues. Because again, people don't walk around saying, yeah, I'm not feeling liked today, so that's why I'm not giving feedback to that person. But if you really dig down and look for those clues, you can draw it out more effectively.
Right. You can dive into the comment, right? Like, they just pulled the rug out from under me. What did that mean? What did that feel like? What was the action? And you can get deeper into the need there.
Exactly. That's another good example of those kind of clues. Pulled the rug out from under me. Threw me under the bus is another one that people commonly use. Okay, that's your time to go deeper. Well, what was that like for you? Tell me more about what happened. Tell me more about what impact that had. So you can ask probing questions to get underneath those kinds of statements. Okay, so in the more developmental coaching, this is where you're giving voice and value. And you're really, again, letting them come to the solution. So again, the other thing about coaching, and again, I think a lot of you who have experience in coaching know this, you don't want to just tell the person what to do. You want that, you just want to ask the basic question, well, what do you think you should do? So that they can come up with the answers, because we all know if they come up with it, then they feel more sense of control, right? They feel more autonomy. They feel like, I came up with this. So we don't want to dive right in. Now, it's not to say there aren't times as a coach that you aren't going to give advice. You aren't going to give feedback and give, coaching. It's just, you don't want that to be the first thing you do. You want to try and let the person come to it themselves. If they still don't come to what you think is an approach that would be helpful for them, then you can share that. And that's really where the second part of this comes in. So for us, we call this meeting one. Meeting one is where you don't go in thinking, I've got to tell this person this. I've got to make sure that they get this feedback. You actually go in curious, and you get voice, and you hear what's going on for them. You make sure they feel valued. And you don't do the F part yet, which is the feedback. The F part, right? Yeah. You don't do the feedback yet. And in an ideal scenario, this is actually two separate meetings. You actually have one meeting with the person where you're simply doing the voice and the value, exploring, trying to get to emotional needs. And then you have a second meeting where you then give the feedback. Now, sometimes that's not possible. Sometimes it all has to be done in one meeting, but you still want to think of it as two meetings. Right now, I'm doing the voice and value part, and I'm letting go of the feedback I have to give. That last 8%. I'm going to get to that. But first, I want to understand where they're coming from, what's on their side of the bridge. And I want to make sure I have all the information too. So then we have meeting 2, which is where we can give the feedback. Again, sometimes in coaching, it's just that meeting 1, but where we need to give some performance feedback. And by the way, this can be giving feedback to a peer. Bosses have emotional needs. Bosses like to feel heard and valued. I know they seem like autonomous robots, but they're not. They're human beings and emotions too, have emotions. So then we can jump into giving the feedback. But they'll be so much more able to hear the feedback because they felt valued, they felt heard, they felt you get them, right? You understood their emotional need. And by the way, this is where we actually now walk back to our side of the bridge and now step in. So one thing that people confuse this for, because by the way, this model of getting to their side of the bridge, that's what empathy is. I used to think empathy was icky and squishy and therapy conversations. It's not. It's just getting off your side of the bridge, being curious and getting to their side of the bridge. But people confuse empathy for sympathy. Empathy is when we get, sympathy is when we get to the side of the bridge and then kind of give in. Oh, they're feeling burnt out, so I better not give them the feedback. Oh, they're feeling overwhelmed, so I'm going to give them more. I'm going to extend the timeline for them. Like we kind of give in. Empathy and great leadership and great coaching is, get to their side of the bridge, but then come back to your side of the bridge and now step in and give that last 8% feedback. And that is where you don't want to hold back. That is where you want to be really clear about and you plan this beforehand. In our conversation training program, we have a whole, approach to planning this so that you're really clear going in. What's that last 8% feedback? What's that part you really need to say so that they hear, so that you don't walk away from the conversation thinking, well, I hope they heard it because I didn't really kind of say it. I sort of avoided it when it started getting difficult. No, that's where you have to step in and really give the feedback.
I think sometimes that's where managers and supervisors and leaders get stuck, right? Because they are so focused on, I need to let them know what's working or not working and how to make adjustments.
Mm-hmm.
But I can't, it's like that takes up so much territory or landscape in their brain that they get through the V and the voice and the value, like almost just as a checkbox. And they're like, I can't wait to get back to my side of the bridge. And the individual that you're talking with can tell when the inquiry is insincere, right?
Yeah.
When you're not really demonstrating that you value the experience the other person is having, and that you're not saying you agree. Like you said, acknowledgement is not agreement, but it's true for this person and they are experiencing it, right? So when I'm working with leaders who are starting to take on this type of conversation, the biggest focus of my coaching with them is on how to hold back on the feedback, that the value and the voice step sort of sets the ground and gets that soil ready so that it's ready to be planted with those feedback seeds.
Yeah, absolutely. Great example. We do have a couple of questions. One is, what tool do you recommend a manager to use to give a supervisor to help them identify their emotional needs? And this is where I'm going to go salesy just for a moment, because this is what IHHP does for a living. And we do have a really great training program that digs into this whole self-awareness. We get underneath the brain science of what happens to our emotions when we get triggered. Because there's another question, whereas, how can we avoid our perspectives and biases from clouding our understanding of the client's perspective? Again, that's that self-awareness piece. So one is, there's great training out there. The other thing is a 360 assessment. I mean, we all have blind spots, and self-assessment is great. But if I think I'm a great coach, or I think I'm authentic, or I'm empathetic, but nobody else does, then I'm just rocking around blind. So we have an emotional intelligence-based 360, which looks at some of those competencies. So, I'm a little product sales here, but I'm really proud of what we do, and I know it makes a difference for people. So Jen, what are your thoughts on that? Besides the things that IHHP sells, what can people or organizations do to help their leaders become more self-aware?
We use 360 tools in some of our leadership development programs. And that's been a tool that we've brought in just in the last 18 months or so. It wasn't used real broadly across our full organization. And it's been incredibly valuable to sort of hold up that mirror and give people a perspective of, are they getting the outcomes that they are hoping for, right? Are they showing up the way they think they're showing up from a leadership perspective across our organizations? Of course, we do employee engagement check-ins, and there's data that we can use there. And we have some questions about leader impact and that sort of thing. So that gives you another data point in the process. And we encourage our leaders to be continually open and asking for feedback on how things are going, right? I look at it as, once you've opened the door to feedback, work to keep that door open, keep those conversations going, and working on how you take in the feedback, as you talked about earlier, role modeling, being willing and open to hearing the feedback, even when it is that you get that broccoli in your teeth and it's a little embarrassing, or it's like, oh, I hated hearing that, but I'm so glad you told me.
Yeah.
You know, that kind of perspective sets a path for people to know, and it normalizes that. So we don't necessarily have one particular tool to help people talk about emotions or to label emotions that we use, but we just are really trying to create that normalization of feedback conversation.
Yeah. And again, if we're going to ask for or be open to feedback, we've got to manage our emotional response to it. Because the minute we get defensive, be like, oh, he doesn't care, you know, he's my boss, so that's scary, or it's a peer. And so we just have to really model being able to receive that feedback. Again, it doesn't always mean agreeing with the feedback. We can explain context. We don't want to get emotionally defensive. That's the main thing. By the way, John asked a great question. Can you provide an example of value in a scenario to avoid giving a sense of agreement? When I think of this, I think of John Gottman, who's a famous researcher in the area of emotional intelligence relationships. He says, all emotions are okay, all behaviors are not. So if I think of that highly technical person, when he's dealing with a driver who only wants a little bit of information, and he's giving these long explanations, and what does the driver start doing? The driver starts interrupting him. Now he's getting really upset and frustrated. So for me to acknowledge, wow, that's really frustrating. It's annoying when someone interrupts you. I can understand why that would be, okay. For you though, to get angry or shut down or whatever the behavior is, you know, that's something that we need. That's a skill that we need to work on. So John, so we're not agreeing with their behavior. We're not agreeing that it's okay for them to shut down or keep going, but we're acknowledging and valuing the emotional need that's driving their behavior. Okay, again, we could spend another hour on that topic, but I want to make sure we get to the part around building a coaching culture. Because, you know, when we registered people for the webinar, we asked them, what are you hoping to get out of this? And one was certainly, you know, how do I coach to emotions? How do I use that skill that's so critical to coaching? Another one was, though, how do I build a coaching culture? And so, Jen, that's really where we want to go next. And just ask you, what are some of the things you're doing within your organization to start to embed a coaching culture?
Yeah, so we're on the front end of this journey, right? So for us, there are little steps. As I said, we've made the recommendation that we add coaching as a leadership competency to the way we talk about what's a successful leader at Maxar look like. We call that our Maxar leadership framework. And so it's a very overt recognition that we want our leaders to coach. In addition to that, we have some more programmatic coaching experiences that are happening across our organization. They may be connected to development programming. We have a particular coaching program that's being offered to some individuals that are tied to a critical project. And the project has been going on for quite a few years. We're getting very close to a deliverable deadline, on top of all of the stresses that we all know about from the pandemic and remote work and all of these kinds of things. We recognize that we need to help support these individuals as we make this big final push towards that deadline. And we wanted to do some coaching for them focused around resiliency and how do they make sure that we're not burning out those employees. We don't want them just to meet the deadline. We need them beyond. And we want to make sure that they're going to be in a good place to be able to do that, and that they're not going to feel they have to leave to be recognized, to be valued, and those sorts of things. And so there's a specific coaching engagement that's happening to help support some of the folks that are working towards that effort. So
and the great
we're on
thing,
the front end. We're on the front end, but we've also done some things to help make sure that the language around coaching is used in a way that's aligned to how we want to think about coaching. So, you know, some people call a performance conversation a coaching, right? And I try not to use that, language, because I don't want people to think you get a coach when something's broken.
right.
There are plenty of times that we take a coaching approach in giving feedback or giving guidance or helping to address performance issues. And that's the way that we bring things up. And it's the mindset that we have going into the conversation. But I'd much rather think that people look at working with coaches or being coached by their manager as it's sort of a recognition of potential and of performance from a good perspective. And we are getting you ready to be as effective as you possibly can be.
Yeah, by the way, now you're really talking to the brain, because if the brain thinks it's something negative, it's going to react, right? It's going to amplify the negative, it's going to defend. Whereas if the brain thinks, oh, this is something positive, right? My boss, my manager is trying to help me be better, then it's much more open, right? Much more available to hear the feedback. The other thing that I think you said that's really interesting was this idea of it not being pejorative, and that behavioral norms in organizations are often part of what establishes them is what's rewarded and what's, you know, ignored or not given feedback on. And so when someone does do a good job of coaching, you know, you want that acknowledged and recognized. When someone isn't stepping in and dealing with an underperformer or dealing with a situation, it's like, is anything done about that? Is that just allowed to continue? Or is actually the coach of the coach who's not stepping in, are they managing them? So it like can go all the way up and down the line. You know, there's a performance issue here, but nobody's giving feedback to anybody up and down the line. So again, is the manager of the manager giving the feedback? Because otherwise it's like, okay, well, I guess this organization doesn't care if I have performance conversations.
Yeah, it's tough. And especially when you're on the beginning of that journey, right? You're planting the seeds for a long play, and it's tough sometimes to figure out where do you start, right? I am many years ago in my career, we started with, you know, sort of first level leaders, teaching them how to coach and asking them to start to take this coaching approach with mostly an individual contributor population. And they were so excited. They said, this is going to be great, but who's doing it for me? Right? Like you can't stop at that layer of leadership, because then they understand the impact that being coached and that the outcomes of that relationship, and they want it for themselves as well. So you do have to have a measured approach in figuring out how are we going to instill coaching as part of our culture, and that it is the way that we achieve amazing things.
Right.
And you have to think through that whole process. You can't just say, well, we're going to give it to them and everybody else is okay.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, the other thing that brings up for me is that need for context. In other words, why am I being asked to coach? What's the value going to be? And so just coming almost full circle to where we started, I hope what people are getting the sense of is just how impactful this type of coaching can be in terms of creating connected relationships, in terms of building trust and respect, in terms of, you know, getting people to that next level of performance, them feeling valued. Like we know from research that people feel valued when somebody tries to help develop them, even when that includes difficult feedback, if that manager does it well. So again, when we think back to the retention, you know, the key issues, right? Driving performance, even innovation, right? If people don't feel they can speak up, then they're not going to share their ideas, or if people feel like it's an environment where nobody's listening to me. So that whole coaching area has just such a broad, you know, business impact.
Yeah, you go to that, back to that wheel, we talk about safety, you know, from a psychological safety perspective, right? I am not going to necessarily be comfortable offering up the next crazy idea that could be the future of the business if it doesn't feel safe to offer something that, am I going to look silly? Is this too crazy of an idea? What if it doesn't work? And psychological safety is just as important in all as those components in the way we were describing safety earlier.
Or by the way, what if it's suggesting that someone else's way of doing it is not the best way? And they might get defensive and not like it. And so I love that you brought up that point about psychological safety, because it's one of the byproducts of this approach to coaching, because then people feel like you get them, they feel connected, they feel trust, and then they feel safe to bring stuff up. So that's just a byproduct. And really almost the empathy part of this, because again, this model of getting to this side of the bridge, it's not just a coaching model, it's an empathy model, it's a relationship model. And that's how you build those relationships. And one of the benefits is driving psychological safety.
Well, and if you think about it, coaches typically, they want what's best for you. They want you to get the best out of the situation. They want you to be able to perform your best. They want you to show up well. They want you to be able to look successful and to be successful. So when you create a coaching relationship with someone who reports to you or in your organization, that trust and that belief that they are offering me this guidance because they want me to do a great job, they want what's best for me, really goes a long way. And it helps smooth over even the bumps when the coach isn't as skilled at it.
Yeah. By the way, that's a whole other strategy that we have called intention and impact, which I know you're familiar with, is clarifying a positive intention for the coaching. Right? I'm doing this because I think you can be an awesome performer. I think you can get to that next level. I think you can get that promotion, or I think you can take on a new project, like, so that there's a positive. All right, we could talk forever, Jen, you and I, about this. So I just want to let you guys know a couple things. I mentioned this idea of this fundamentals of emotional intelligence class. And again, this is the part that really gets to that self-awareness and emotional management piece. It's not a coaching class. It's not going to get into the building bridges like what we talked about here. It's how do I manage my side of the bridge? How do I manage my biases, judgments, reactions? How can I be more aware of my emotional needs? And yours truly will be facilitating. It's May 24th, 1 to 3 o'clock Eastern, and you will receive an email with a special code for the folks that joined us here on the webinar. Okay, so Jen, I want to just give a huge thank you. This is always such a pleasure. I could do this all day. Whenever we talk, we have these conversations. So, when Jen and I were first talking about doing this, I just said, and we started talking about it, and we actually got into the conversation. I said, Jen, what we're doing right now, just talking about it, is the live cast, right? And so
that's pretty much what we've been talking about.
Yeah. It's been just so fun doing it together with you. And I just know that, you brought so much value and real life experience to this for the group. By the way, for those who want to get connected with us, both Jennifer and I are on LinkedIn. Bill Benjamin, Jennifer York, you'll be able to find us. I'm the Institute for Health and Human Potential. As you all know, she's with Maxar. Feel free to reach out with questions, comments. We're both active on LinkedIn. All right. In the last couple of minutes, I'm going to turn over to Adrian, who's going to close things off for us.
And if we have a couple more minutes, Bill, it's been so insightful. It's been such an engaged audience asking lots of questions and lots of feedback in the chat, and a couple of great other questions that came in. If we have a couple more minutes left, if we have time to answer, one question was, what do I do with someone who's already coached and given the feedback to multiple times, but they aren't changing their behavior? And also another one, it kind of ties in, what if we tried coaching and it's seen as the flavor of the month and we already did that?
Jen, do you want to take that second one? It could be the
yeah.
flavor.
I want to think about how I want to answer that.
I'll tell you what. I'll answer the first one, and while you're taking the second one on. So the first one, where the person isn't changing, and you're getting frustrated, then that's the conversation. The conversation with them is less about, oh, here's what I need you to do differently. It's about, why aren't you changing? Like, again, assuming you've been clear, assuming you've said that last 8%, and I really want you to question yourself, have I really said what needs to be said? Have you connected to their emotional needs? So assuming you've actually done all that and they're still not changing, then that's the conversation. And again, in that conversation, you're trying to dig out what's the emotional need that's causing them to resist and not change. So that's the conversation.
When I think about the curse of the flavor of the month, right? In organizations that I've been involved in have certainly fallen into this sort of coaching was popular 6 months ago or 6 years ago, and we tried it, and now we don't do that anymore.
Yeah.
I would start to ask questions around what problem are we trying to solve? Why do we think this approach is going to be successful this time? What was the components or the factors that were involved that made it not successful last time? Was there true buy-in? Was there support? Was this, a Band-Aid? Did we only give it to a small population? Did we do it just for a short period of time? I would do some of that needs assessment work and diving into what worked or didn't work last time and what's different now so that we think it could potentially work in this situation.
Yeah, that's great. By the way, Maureen just asked, I heard you mention coaching surgeons, and I've done both emotional intelligence training and coaching, not only for surgeons, but US Marines. I've worked with engineers at NASA, the Johnson Space Center. And what attracted me to this work is what attracted them. And we didn't go in this today, but it's the brain science underneath what happens when our emotional needs get triggered. Many of you may have heard of the amygdala and how that gets hijacked and we can't think clearly. And so they really open up, as I did as a technical guy, when they learn the brain science. And they start to recognize that, emotions really do drive behavior at that really foundational brain level. So thanks. Oh, and Patty, thank you so much for your great feedback. So I do think we should close things off. So Adrian, we'll let you close it off. And thanks
right
to everyone.
right at three. What perfect timing here. Thank you both. This was great. And hi again to everyone else. If you could please take a minute to fill out the livecast feedback that I just shared in the chat box, that would be greatly appreciated. We'll also send a link to it in the follow-up. And I once again just wanted to thank everyone for taking the time to attend today. Feel free to visit IHHP.com if you want to learn more about us and yourself. And please check your email, as we'll be sending you a recording of the live cast early next week, a link to our May 24th Fundamentals program with Bill that he mentioned, and lots of additional information and resources that we know you'll find helpful and useful. So I want to thank Bill and Jennifer for a great, insightful conversation. This was amazing. And we hope to see you all again at our next live cast.
Thanks, Bill.
Thank you all.